lay low. There's nothing you can bring, he'll say, to God's table that will ever argue against the fact that you were guilty before him. And friends, that ought to be a good thing for us. Because there are some times, if some of you teachers, how many of y'all have been teachers in here, preschool all the way up to high school? We have a few in here, don't we? Y'all ever have a student come to you and say, man, I haven't done any homework, and it's the end of the semester, and I don't get this grade up, I'm going to lose this, or get grounded here, or lose my scholarship there. And what do they ask for? They ask for extra credit. And that's how a lot of people treat God. That someday they're going to stand before God, and they're going to say, God, you know, I just got busy with life. I got into all the kids stuff and the church stuff, but could you just give me a little bit more time? And what Paul's going to argue is that no, this is your chance to come to know Christ, and you are guilty. There's no objection you can bring to me that is going to change that fact. And friends, we need to know that Paul was being misrepresented. People were taking his message of grace and using it as a license to sin. And every teacher of the Bible is always going to have someone challenge their beliefs because they're going to take the words they say and twist them to sinful gains. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, do you know what's the biggest feeder of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, false cults, religions are? Baptist members. To be specific, Southern Baptist members. Scary. Friends, people can sweet talk and get you into all sorts of things. But you need to know what Paul is saying, and what he's arguing is this, is that God is fair. He is faithful. He is righteous. He is holy. And to take that away from him, as these arguments were coming against Paul, is to take away what God and who he is. So friends, this morning, big idea is simply this. God's truth prevails over every sinful objection. You know what the first rule of studying theology is? There is a God. You know what the second rule is? You're not him and I'm not him. Thank you, J. Ligon Duncan, for that quote. So what Paul is going to argue is if you want to walk with God in this life, then trust him at his word. Take him for what he says and believe everything he tells you to do. He is good. He is faithful. He's never failed you. Don't object to him. Follow him. And some of you, as you start this 2025, that may be the simple thing you need to do with your life. Take God at his word. He's not going to let you down. He's not going to throw you away. Don't fight him. Follow him. Don't try to flee from him. Submit yourself to him, and your life will go much better. So let's look at that first objection here in verses 1 and 2. And the first objection you'll see up there on the screen is they were arguing, these people in Rome were arguing against the fairness of God. Is God really fair? And if you look back at Romans chapter 2 and verse 11, it said God is no respecter of persons. God is no respecter of persons. And so he says, then what advantage has a Jew? What is it good to be a Jew? If God is fair, then how can God have any advantage, or how can being a Jew being any advantage over anyone else? And he goes on in verse 1, he says, or what is the value, what is the profit of circumcision? And Paul says this, much in every way. Look, it's one thing to know God, it's another thing to have access to God. He says at the end of verse 2, he says, to begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. Friends, the question here is what the people were saying is why in the world should we be a Jew or a Gentile? If God's going to condemn everyone, why does it matter? And he tells you why it matters. He says there in verses 1 and 2 that because they had access to the Word of God. They had access to the Word of God. Friends, you in this church, I in this church have access to the very